observational consequence of this peculiar nature. And it's called the Casimir force. I think I have a slide in there, Jamie. So the Casimir force can be thought of in the following way. Imagine that you've got two metal plates, like you see here in the graphic. You put them very, very close to one another. That separation distance is maybe 100 nanometers, so certainly much smaller than a human hair, very, very small distance. And then you imagine you have a vacuum chamber that you put these two small plates in. And then you turn on the vacuum pumps and you pull all of the air out. So there's nothing in there, right? At least that's the way we would think about it. So now we're going to conduct a little thought experiment. We're going to imagine that Jamie has superhero powers, and he can shrink himself down to be a wee, tiny little atomic person. And we're going to ask him to go into the vacuum chamber. And we're going to ask him to measure the pressure on the outside of the plates. And we're going to ask him to measure the pressure in between the two plates. And so we're going to expect, based on the normal way we exist, he's going to say 0, 0 on the outside, and he's going to say 0 in between the two plates. But what he's going to report back is he's going to say 0 pressure on the outside, like we expect. But he's going to say there is a negative pressure between the two plates. What the hell is going on? Well, the quantum field is full of fluctuating fields and forces. Matter is both a particle and a wave. You may have heard that statement at some point in your life. And so all these little bits of energy, right, they have wavelengths associated with them. And so any wavelength that is bigger than the physical gap of the cavity, it won't be able to manifest between the cavities. So when we add up all the bits of energy on the outside, that's our zero reference. We add up all the bits of energy on the outside. And if we add up all the bits of energy in between the two plates, there are less bits of energy because all the bigger wavelengths are excluded. And so there is a deficiency of vacuum energy that manifests between the two plates. And that results in that negative pressure that wants to pull those two plates together. That's called the Casimir force. A guy by the name of Casimir was the guy that derived that back in 1948, but it took us until the late 90s to actually measure this in the lab to the physics community's satisfaction. And so it's been studied hundreds of times since, measuring forces at different regimes, if you will. And there's also something called the transverse Casimir force. So you try and slide those two plates relative to one another. The vacuum wants to resist you sliding those two plates. And so this is a very real phenomenon. And it's a wonderful illustration of the peculiar nature of reality at the microscopic level, right? So, the theory was worked out in the late 40s. The experimental stuff was started in the 90s, and there's been a bunch of work since then. And I think they're even looking at trying to use the Casimir force in MEMS devices. But all that to micro electromechanical machines, some small gears that you can't see with your eyes, but they serve different purposes that people are trying to come up with for sensors, maybe some things in your car, some future chips that might be in your phone or something like that. Things where they make micromechanical systems that they make them with light because you can't even see these kinds of things. So the quantum vacuum, this field of particles and forces and so forth, is a very real phenomenon. And so this stuff I just described to you is the negative vacuum energy density that Alcubierre highlighted in his paper when he said, we don't know how to make exotic matter in general relativity. So that circle on the Venn diagram doesn't tell us where to go. But quantum mechanics tells us how to make negative vacuum energy density in the context of what we see in the Casimir cavity. And so maybe we can, some future generation of scientists will figure out how to do something in some way to, like if you ask what's in those rings around the IXS Enterprise, right? Maybe it's some deeper understanding of the nature of the quantum vacuum. And point in fact, I talked to you about, you asked me when might this happen, and I said that I can't tell you when, but I know what I need to be doing next, right? So in my mind, I think some of the next big chapters of physics are going to be centered around there's going to be a lot of fruit there, and that may provide us the opportunity to add more circles to the Venn diagram, or maybe expand one, or what have you, and so forth.
So what kind of experiments have to be conducted in order to expand this? Like, so you're talking about things that are going to be achieved in particle colliders. Like, how are they? Like, what do you anticipate?
That's a good question, and I'm there. So there's a lot of different approaches people have taken to try and explore the nature of the quantum vacuum, and you can even start to look at cosmological observations when we talk about dark energy. Right, that's equated to the quantum vacuum at scale, the cosmological scale, if you will. I think there's even some recent stuff that's come out in the peer-reviewed literature that the cosmological constant may not be constant; it may actually be changing over time. And so there's some experimentation. It has nothing to do with that idea of space work. The people that are coming in care less about space work, but they're trying to understand the nature of the cosmological constant, quantum vacuum at scale. So there's a domain where some interesting work might be done. I know universities all over the globe still do